Mayday, mayday. I'm losing both engines. Somebody answer me. The captain's voice cracked through the cockpit radio like glass under pressure. At 9,000 meters above a white ocean of clouds, the aircraft shuddered violently. The quiet hum of its engines replaced by an unnatural silence that made every blinking instrument feel louder. In the co-pilot seat, the young girl didn't move. Her head rested gently against the seat back, long hair falling across the aviation headset that covered her ears. Her eyes were closed, her breathing slow, almost peaceful, like she was dreaming somewhere far away from the chaos exploding around her. But the man gripping the controls beside her wasn't dreaming. Captain Daniel Reeves had flown commercial aircraft for 22 years. He had trained in storms, handled electrical failures, navigated through turbulence that made passengers cry and pray. Yet nothing in 2 decades of aviation prepared him for the terrifying numbers flashing across his screens right now. Engine 1, dead. Engine 2, failing fast. Altitude dropping by the second. Reeves swallowed hard, his hands tightening around the yoke as the aircraft lurched again. Outside the massive cockpit windows, the sky stretched endless and indifferent. No airports nearby, no clear landing strip, just sky, clouds, and gravity waiting patiently below. Control, this is Flight 742. Do you copy? He tried again, forcing steadiness into his voice. Static answered him. Behind him, the cabin remained unaware of hundreds of passengers. Trusting that the 2 figures in the cockpit knew exactly what they were doing, Reeves glanced sideways for a brief moment. The girl beside him looked impossibly small in that seat. Pink shirt, denim jeans, aviation headset slightly oversized for her head. If someone walked into the cockpit right now, they might assume she was just a child allowed to sit up front for fun. But the reality was stranger and far more complicated. Her presence there was the reason this flight had even taken off today. The aircraft dipped again. A warning alarm screamed through the cockpit like a siren. Reeves cursed under his breath and reached for the throttle that no longer responded. Come on, he muttered. And somewhere far above the clouds, beyond the silent tension of the struggling aircraft, 2 stealth fighters sliced through the blue sky, unaware that within minutes they would hear a call sign no one expected to hear from a kid. Before this story goes any further, take a second to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. Because sometimes the most unexpected voices are the ones that change everything. And at 9,000 meters, with a powerless aircraft slowly falling through the sky, the question wasn't just whether Captain Reeves could save the plane. The real question was why the only person who might know how wasn't even awake yet. Captain Daniel Reeves prided himself on one simple rule he had followed his entire career: control what you can, and stay calm about what you cannot. It was the first thing instructors drilled into every pilot during training. Panic spreads faster than fire in a cockpit. But as the instruments flickered in front of him, Reeves felt something unfamiliar pressing against his chest. Fear. Quiet but stubborn. Not fear of dying. Pilots learn to live with that possibility. It was fear of failing the people behind that reinforced door. Families returning home. Business travelers checking emails. A grandmother probably telling stories to a restless child somewhere in the back rows. None of them knew that their engines had just gone silent at cruising altitude. Reeves adjusted the aircraft's pitch carefully, coaxing every possible second of glide from the powerless plane. Okay, stay with me, he whispered to the aircraft itself, like it was an old friend refusing to give up. He had already tried restarting the engines twice. No response. Fuel readings were normal. Systems showed no fire or mechanical rupture. It didn't make sense. A dual-engine failure without warning was the kind of scenario that aviation textbooks barely mentioned because it was so rare. His eyes flicked again to the girl beside him, Lila Carter, 12 years old. Though sitting there now with her calm face and relaxed posture, she looked even younger. Earlier that morning she had been full of energy, asking questions about altitude and wind patterns while Reeves tried to focus on pre-flight checks. She wasn't supposed to be flying with them originally, but something about her quiet confidence had convinced the airline executives to allow a supervised cockpit visit during the flight. Reeves had agreed, reluctantly. A child in the cockpit wasn't exactly standard procedure, but the request had come from people far above his pay grade, and now here she was, asleep during the worst aviation emergency he had ever faced. The aircraft trembled again as it dropped through a layer of thin clouds. Warning alarms pulsed rhythmically. Reeves reached for the radio once more. Control, this is Flight 742. Dual engine failure, altitude 9,000 meters and descending. Requesting emergency guidance. Static again. He tapped the headset harder against his ear, as if the signal might appear through sheer frustration. Nothing. The silence from ground control made the cockpit feel isolated in a way Reeves had never experienced before, like they were the only aircraft left in the sky. His mind raced through options, glide range calculations, potential emergency landing zones. At this altitude and location, the nearest runway was nearly 200 kilometers away. Impossible without engines. Reeves exhaled slowly. Pilots train for emergencies by imagining worst-case scenarios. But there was one rule, though simulations always followed. Something still worked. A backup system. a communication channel, an auxiliary engine. Right now, Reeves had none of those. Just gravity in a rapidly shrinking window of time. He looked again at Leela. Her breathing remained steady, peaceful. For a moment he envied her ability to sleep through disaster, but then he remembered something strange from earlier in the flight, something she had said quietly while studying the cockpit instruments. If anything goes wrong up here, she had told him, almost casually, there's always someone listening. Reeves had assumed she meant air traffic control. Now he wasn't so sure. The aircraft dropped another 200 meters. The altimeter needle moved with cruel determination. Reeves tightened his grip on the controls and forced his focus back to flying. One problem at a time, one decision at a time. But far above them, cutting silently through the sky at twice the speed of sound, 2 F-22 fighters were already approaching the region. Their pilots weren't looking for a passenger aircraft. They were finishing a routine training patrol, and within the next few minutes, something would appear on their radios that would make both of them sit upright in disbelief. Because sometimes help doesn't arrive through official channels. Sometimes it comes through a voice no one expects to hear. Captain Reeves didn't believe in coincidences when it came to aviation. Every malfunction had a cause. Every warning light meant something specific. But the longer he stared at the silent engine indicators, the more it felt like the aircraft had simply decided to stop listening to him. He eased the nose of the plane downward just enough to maintain a stable glide. The trick now was conserving altitude while searching for any possible landing option. But at 9,000 meters above open sky, there weren't many options. The cockpit lighting flickered slightly as another system recalibrated itself. Reeves glanced quickly at the electrical panel. Still operational, but unstable. That meant the radios might not hold much longer either. Control. Flight 742 declaring emergency. Do you copy? He said again, forcing his voice into the calm, practiced tone that pilots are trained to use even when things are going wrong. Static answered once more. Reeves leaned back slightly, tension building behind his eyes. In 2 decades of flying, he had never felt this cut off from the world. Beside him, Leela shifted faintly in her seat. Not awake yet, but something about the movement caught his attention. The girl had been quiet since takeoff. Not the nervous quiet of a child sitting somewhere she didn't belong, but the observant quiet of someone studying everything around her. He remembered how she had traced her finger across the navigation display earlier, asking questions most trainees didn't even think to ask. How do the fighters find you if you lose contact? She had asked. Reeves had laughed at the time. We don't lose contact. But now he wondered if she had known something he didn't. The aircraft jolted again as a pocket of turbulent air rolled through the clouds. Reeves steadied the controls quickly. Altitude now 8,700 meters. Losing too fast. His brain worked through calculations automatically. At this glide rate they might stay airborne another 20 minutes. Maybe less if conditions worsened. 20 minutes to find a miracle. He looked again toward the sleeping girl, a strange thought creeping into his mind. Earlier that morning, during the pre-flight briefing, one of the airline supervisors had introduced her in a way that felt oddly formal for a child. Lila's father served in the Air Force, the man had explained quickly. She's familiar with aviation culture. Reeves hadn't thought much about it at the time. Plenty of military families loved airplanes, but now, in the silent tension of the cockpit, he realized something else. The headset she wore wasn't part of the plane's standard passenger gear. It was a military-grade communications model. He hadn't noticed earlier because it looked similar enough to civilian aviation equipment. But now the difference was obvious. Reeves leaned slightly closer, studying the device resting against her ear. The thought forming in his mind felt ridiculous. Why would a kid be carrying something like that? Another alarm beeped sharply. Altitude 8,500 meters. Reeves forced his attention back to flying. Curiosity could wait. Survival could not. Then, suddenly, the quiet crackle of radio static shifted. Reeves froze. A signal. Faint, but unmistakable. He grabbed the transmitter instantly. Control. Flight 742 responding. Do you read? The static sharpened, then faded again. Not ground control. Something else. Something airborne. Reeves adjusted the frequency dial slowly, listening carefully. For a moment there was nothing but the hum of the cockpit electronics. Then a distant voice flickered through the channel, clear, sharp, and military. Falcon 2. Maintaining patrol vector. Reeves blinked. Fighter aircraft, somewhere nearby. Relief surged through him like oxygen returning to his lungs. If fighters were in range, they could relay communications to ground control. They might even guide the aircraft toward a safe descent corridor. Reeves reached for the transmitter again. Unidentified fighter. This is civilian flight 742 experiencing dual engine failure. Requesting immediate assistance. He released the button and waited. Silence stretched for several seconds. Then the cockpit radio crackled again. Flight 742, repeat your call sign. Reeves sat upright, hope sparking in his chest. But before he could answer, something unexpected happened. The girl beside him stirred again, this time more noticeably. Her fingers twitched lightly against the armrest. Her head tilted slightly forward. Reeves watched in confusion as her eyes slowly opened, blinking against the cockpit lights. For a second she looked disoriented, like someone waking from a long nap. Then she glanced at the instrument panel and immediately understood everything. Her posture changed in an instant. Calm, focused, awake in a way that made her seem older than 12. Reeves opened his mouth to explain the situation, but she raised one hand gently, stopping him. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but steady. "Don't answer them yet." Reeves stared at her. "What?" Leela adjusted the microphone on her headset and leaned slightly toward the radio transmitter. Outside the cockpit window, two dark shapes were beginning to appear against the bright horizon. Fighter jets, closing fast. The girl pressed the transmit button calmly, and when she spoke into the radio, the words she used made the experienced captain beside her go completely still. "Falcon Command," she said softly. "This is Viper." For a moment, the cockpit felt frozen in time, like the world itself had paused to listen to what the young girl had just said. Captain Reeves stared at Lila, his hand still hovering near the radio controls, trying to process the calm confidence in her voice. Outside the windshield, the two gray shapes of the approaching fighter jets grew larger, their sleek wings cutting smoothly through the sky as they closed the distance. Inside the cockpit, the only sound was the soft electronic hum of failing systems and the distant rush of air against the powerless aircraft. Then the radio crackled again, sharper this time, the voice on the other end suddenly alert. "Unknown transmission. Repeat identification." Lila didn't panic, didn't hesitate, didn't even look surprised. She simply adjusted the microphone slightly closer to her lips and pressed the transmit button again, her eyes moving quickly across the cockpit instruments like she had studied them her entire life. "Falcon Command, this is Viper," she repeated, her tone steady and respectful but carrying a strange authority that made Captain Reeves feel like he was suddenly the least experienced person in the room. "Civilian aircraft, Flight 742, dual engine failure, altitude 8,000 meters and descending, requesting escort and relay to command." Reeves blinked in disbelief. The words sounded natural coming from her, precise and controlled. But what shocked him most was how quickly the fighters responded. The radio erupted with movement and urgency. "Falcon 2, confirm visual on target aircraft." Another voice answered instantly. "Confirmed. Passenger jet in distress. No engine output. We're moving into escort position." The two F-22s curved gracefully through the sky, their powerful engines leaving faint trails as they aligned beside the struggling aircraft. One slid to the left wing, the other slightly behind and above, like silent guardians appearing out of nowhere. Reeves felt his chest loosen slightly as the realization hit him someone was finally listening. He glanced at Lila again, still trying to understand who she really was. Just minutes ago she had looked like a kid who fell asleep during a long flight, but now her eyes moved with calm focus, scanning the instruments while quietly calculating something in her head. "How did you?" Reeves started to ask, but the words faded when the girl spoke again, this time not into the radio but directly to him. "We're still losing altitude too fast," she said gently, as if stating something obvious. "If we hold this glide angle, we'll reach thicker air layers sooner and slow the descent." Reeves hesitated only half a second before realizing she was right. The idea wasn't complicated, but in the stress of the moment he hadn't considered the atmospheric advantage yet. He adjusted the aircraft's pitch carefully, following her suggestion. The change was subtle but noticeable. The descent rate dropped slightly. Outside the cockpit window, the nearest fighter jet drifted closer, the pilot inside tilting his wings in a brief signal of acknowledgement. The radio crackled again. "Viper, Falcon 2, we have you visual. Command wants confirmation of situation." Reeves expected Lila to hesitate now. After all, she was still just a child, sitting in a co-pilot seat of a dying aircraft. But instead, she spoke with the same calm tone as before. "Dual engine failure confirmed. Aircraft gliding. Requesting navigation corridor and emergency descent support." The fighter pilot answered almost immediately. "Copy that, Viper, we're with you." Reeves felt something shift inside him in that moment, not just relief, but a strange respect. Whatever the story behind this girl was, the pilots in those F-22s clearly knew that call sign, and more importantly, they trusted it. The aircraft continued gliding through layers of white clouds as the fighters maintained position beside them, their presence turning the empty sky into something less lonely. Reeves looked at Lila once more, noticing the faint determination in her expression, the way she stayed focused despite everything happening around them. In the quiet seconds that followed, he realized something powerful. Sometimes help arrives in the most unexpected form, and sometimes the person others underestimate the most is the one who quietly knows exactly what to do. And maybe that's the message worth remembering. Never judge someone's strengths by their age, their size, or the seat they're sitting in, because courage and wisdom can show up in the most surprising places, especially when people choose to stay calm, trust each other, and believe that even in the worst moments there is always a way forward.